Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Overcoming the Podcast. You are joining in today on this ADHD mini series where I am bringing on yet another guest that I'm very excited about and connected with long time ago before I was even diagnosed. Found like one of his old videos in my TikTok saved things before I even knew who he was or that I had ADHD that I literally related to. And then full circle, here we are. So I have Ron with me from ADHD. Ron, do you want to say hi and introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Ron. Um, go by ADHD underscore Ron on Instagram, ADHD Coach Ron on TikTok. Um, and yeah, how's it going? Thanks for
Good.
having me.
I'm so
Um,
excited.
yeah, so man, about me. Let's see. I was diagnosed when I was younger, like around 11 or 12.
Mm-hmm.
And really I have like two separate ADHD kind of journeys here. When when the pandemic started, I was really going through a lot of, like many people, a lot of mental health struggles.
Yeah.
As an extroverted person, I really struggled with having to kind of isolate.
Mm.
I was having a hard time activating myself to do anything.
Yeah.
I remember when we had the like Zoom happy hours with friends where everybody was like, "Oh, we're gonna get together." I actually hated that because I felt like I wasn't getting the, you know, social aspect of things. I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
feeling people there. And I'm
Yeah.
someone that likes to pace, get up, walk around. And so having to sit in front of a Zoom screen with friends, I was like, I'm not getting anything out of this. I kept like leaving, coming back.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really frustrating for me.
Yeah.
I started having panic attacks, and a little bit, I think, having to do with being isolated, but also I was really frustrated with where I was in my life.
Mm.
I think from having kind of an entire, life filled with you haven't reached your potential, or if you just apply yourself, things would work out better for you,
Yeah.
was kind of putting me in this position where I was in my mid 30s and I felt as if I hadn't accomplished anything. And so I was having panic attacks, which I thought were uh, me having a heart attack. Uh,
Yeah.
and
It
you
feels
know,
like you're dying,
it's
literally.
crazy. Like
Yeah.
one night we woke up in the middle of the night, or I woke up in the middle of the night and woke my wife up in the middle of the night
Yeah.
to tell her that I was having a heart attack. She was like, "I don't want to invalidate what you're going through, but I don't think you're having a heart attack." And I was like, "I swear I'm having a heart attack. This is happening." And she's like, "Okay, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to call?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to call the nurse's hotline." And I called, and I remember saying out loud to a nurse that I was having a heart attack, and she started asking me questions, and I almost immediately was like, "Oh, I'm not having a heart attack. I'm
Mm.
fine now. This feels really silly."
Yeah.
And I started to go to therapy, and
Mm-hmm.
in talking with my therapist, ADHD came up, and I was like, "Yeah, I was diagnosed when I was younger, and I don't take medication now, and I haven't for a while." And we started exploring that. I started to get curious myself, so I started researching some things online
Mm-hmm.
and found ADHD TikTok, which I'm sure a lot of people have found,
Yep.
and found some really great creators that were validating me in a way that I'd never been validated before, right? My
Yeah.
experience with ADHD was very much my own perception of it, and then what I had been told from parents and teachers and doctors.
Mm-hmm.
And so there wasn't a lot of community, and me sitting there talking to other people with ADHD going like, "Oh, I know, right? Isn't that hard?" Instead, it was me saying something to somebody in like an offhanded comment and them telling me either, "Oh, everybody deals with that," or "That's weird," and stuff that it makes you feel like, "Wow, I should shut up," right?
Yeah.
Um, so after realizing all these things about ADHD, I took a deep dive into it and started kind of posting content about my own experience, things that I was learning, and really found that I wasn't embarrassed to post a video online talking about how I struggled to brush my teeth twice a day. I
Yeah.
wasn't embarrassed to kind of turn the camera around and go like, look at my clothes everywhere, and be like, hey, if you are dealing with this, like, you're not alone, basically, right?
Yeah.
It feels so small. You sit there and think, this is a personal failure of mine. This
Yeah.
isn't, normal. This is
Hmm.
me not applying myself or not trying hard.
Yeah.
And when you're able to be like, well, wait, no, look, I struggle with some things that other people think are stupid. Like, they
Yeah.
think it's just like, this is silly.
Adults should be able to
And
do this. Like,
right, yeah, like
yeah.
all the things I was struggling,
Hmm.
when people say the term where they're just like, adulting, right? Like, that was like a big thing. We were like, hashtag adulting.
Yep.
Like, I think there were people that were joking, because I was not. I was like, no, this is the worst thing ever. It's a
Yeah.
scam. Like,
No, really. I'm
there's
like, this
way
is,
too,
I remember I was like, I got a doctorate degree. Like I had like, because for me it was like I was in like trauma mode for a long time and my nervous system
yeah,
was like wired in survival, but like my way of coping was just like push through, get it done anyways, right? So
absolutely
I
right.
basically was like this hyper focus burnout. I made sure I was a straight A student. I made sure I did all these things, but then the less structure I got in school, I started to realize that like I was having a really hard time. Um, and it's interesting that you bring up the stuff about like the daily life stuff because I would struggle, same thing, get out of bed, brush your teeth, put away laundry. The main piece of shame for me was like I would have laundry sitting in a chair for a couple of weeks. Sometimes it's like the
Months,
strategy, like
let's
put
be
it on
real.
your bed. Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
It's not that bad, right? It's like put it on your bed so then you
right.
won't have to do it. And I would like push it to
Move
the
it.
side of my bed a little bit so I could actually
Yeah,
go to sleep. And like, but I could not do it. And I'm like, I want to do the thing. I can't make my brain do the thing. I am feeling so much shame for not doing the thing right now. And
yeah,
all I can think about is the fact that I need to do the thing, but I can't start. And it's
right.
so simple. And I would get so frustrated. And similar to you, it was just like when I was talking to my therapist about things, it was like, well, that also can be something else, right? Because like first it's like, well, it could be like avoidance, fear response. And I'm like, no, I've done so much work to where now like my nervous system is regulated. I'm not in this. And so my brain is having to relearn things. And we're like, oh, ADHD has been there all along.
Yeah,
Um, and it's a huge source of shame as an
totally.
adult.
There's so many times that I talk with my clients that everything makes sense. I kind of feel this way about everyone, right? It doesn't mean that there's excuse for like shitty behavior or anything like that, right? But you can always like backtrack and be like, oh, I get it,
Yeah.
right? And for ADHDers, we have we typically just feel emotions more intensely and struggle to regulate it. And so
Mm-hmm.
when you realize that from the beginning of your life, certain things are going to affect us more intensely, right? Um,
Absolutely.
and so when you realize that like shame, and then your parents probably had ADHD or something, right? Like it ends up
Yep.
being genetic. And so you're like,
Yep.
oh, so they were shamed into doing stuff. They're shaming me into doing stuff. And it's when you're like, oh, they're shaming you, it becomes this thing where a lot of times it does come from love. I'm not saying that everyone has the same experience that I did, but when I think
Yeah.
about my experience, my parents, I think, were afraid because many ADHDers start out having uneven kind of brain development, right? So
Yeah.
say uneven because there's certain areas where they're thriving,
Mm-hmm.
and then they get put into like advanced or gifted classes,
Yep.
and you've got this pride as a parent where you're like, I'm so proud of my kid, look how great they're doing, they're 5 years old and they're testing out of math, and like, oh, this is
Yep.
great and fantastic.
Yep.
And then we hit a wall where things executive function starts we have to self motivate, right? We have to start
Yeah.
turning things in ourselves, and there ends up being the struggle. Well, wait a second, why are they struggling there? They're so smart and bright. And we
Mm-hmm.
think gifted kids as just, well, they're smart at everything, they're going to be great at everything.
Mm-hmm.
And executive function is such a strange thing to people that don't struggle super hard with it. One of my favorite videos, and there's a few different people that claim to have it and who created it, but I just know it from Jessica McCabe, on YouTube, does the wall of awful,
Mm-hmm.
and it talks about when kids. So an example is like a kid comes home and they have their backpack and the parents like, go do your homework, and they go into the room with their backpack and the parent walks in like 15 minutes later and the kid is just sitting with their backpack, like playing with the zipper.
Yeah.
And the parent is just like, I told you to start your homework. Why didn't you start your homework? And the wall of awful is this invisible wall that gets built from like difficulty with things. And as a child, when you can't communicate what you're struggling with,
Yep.
it's almost like we don't have that button that means go. And so you're sitting there going like, I don't know what to do right now. Like, how
Yeah.
do I start things? Is there like, do I have to pull a lever? Like, how do I get
Yeah.
myself to do it?
Yeah.
And they're sitting there trying to figure it out. And these bricks get built from shame, from embarrassment, from not knowing things, and especially being told your whole life how smart and bright and great you are. You
Yeah.
start having kids that are just like, well, if I'm supposed to be great at this thing and I can't do it, then it must be this personality flaw. It must be something I'm doing wrong.
Yeah. And
And
you take smart as your identity marker. So
100%.
then when you fail, who even am I? Right?
People
Like,
start thinking it's manipulation.
yep.
Then you start saying things where they're just like, oh, you're not doing that on purpose, right?
Yeah.
Or you don't want to do it, that's why you're not doing it. And it's
Yep.
like, well, I'm not doing it because, sure, maybe it is because I don't want to, but it's not because I'm choosing not to do it. It's
Yeah.
because my brain just
No
is like, no,
dopamine. Like it won't do it.
no, we're
If
not
I
doing
don't
it.
care, I'm not doing it.
Yeah, it has to make sense, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
um a lot of things I talk about with clients too, especially parents, is like situational variability, where they're like, well, I've seen them start this project, or they were able to start their homework yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And situational variability is the idea that there are so many things that go into play, right? Like we talk a lot about making sure that you've had enough water, enough sleep, you've gotten some exercise, you've eaten well, like all these things, but then also just what kind of mood you're in, like whether you had a rough day, if you have any spoons left, like any of this stuff
Yep.
has to do with whether or not you can succeed. But we just look at it as every time that I show up to do something, I should be able to do it.
Yep.
And it's just, there's going to be differences, and
Yep.
we have to learn to give ourselves grace. So
I agree.
that's something I'm really big on. Every time I have like consultation with clients, I'm always just like, look, I can help you with what you want to do, but my big thing and my like push for the ADHD community is to give yourself grace, because we ultimately do suck at self-motivating.
Yeah.
We have to really work hard to do things, right?
Yeah.
If something's difficult for me to do, even if it's important and I know it's important, I have to put forth so much more energy to do that thing. And
Mm-hmm.
if there's multiple things of that, it's going to get harder and harder each time. So we
Yeah.
find ways around it. We find ways to, delegate. We find ways to like cheat the system, not cheat, but cheat the system, where it's like, oh, I really struggle with doing this. Well, I'm going to ask help for that. Or I found a roundabout creative way to do it, right? Like how many of us have a thing where we're like, oh no, this is how I do it. Watch this. And we have this amazing shortcut to get something done, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's because that's our coping mechanism to do it. But unfortunately, without help and support, our coping mechanisms end up being sense of urgency, which procrastination, stressing ourselves out, making us feel like shit to motivate ourselves to do it. And that
Yeah.
turns into anxiety, depression, and eventually it runs out of its, juice. And we end up sitting there feeling like crap. So
Yeah, and we have to push ourselves into survival mode in order to get our body to actually do the things we need it to do. We actually have to make it seem like I am in the woods or I am in
and there's a
nature and there
tiger.
is a lion
Yeah,
freaking coming at
for
me and
sure.
I'm gonna die if I don't do this. And I need all of the physiological stuff in that way to do it. And then we get addicted to that. And then we thrive and just learn how to live based on that addiction to being in survival mode and we don't know any better. And we get to this point, like what I was talking about earlier, is like this hyper focus, but then you can only sustain that for so long because it's not like the lion's going to be coming at you forever. Our body in survival mode is meant to work like resolve. This is a short term thing. And then once you're alive, you're good. But
it it stops being effective, but it
yes,
still ends up being like traumatic, right? Like we end up
exactly.
feeling the pressure from it, but we need it more. It's like a drug, right? Like I almost
Mm-hmm.
think procrastination could be like a drug. If you use it all the time for everything, you have to use it more and more to get the effectiveness from it, but
Yeah.
it's still going to hurt you the same.
It
And
is.
it gets to the point where I have clients like in their like late 30s, 40s, even later than that, saying, I don't understand. It started to become harder and harder. Like, and now it's like debilitating. Now I can't do anything.
Yeah.
And it's like you burnt out.
Yeah.
You're chronically burnt out.
Yeah.
And you know, it's not just going to be like oh, I need a rest day or I'm going to take a
Mm.
weekend. It is a lifestyle change.
Yeah.
It is relearning how to set boundaries. It is recognizing
Mhm.
when your tank's on empty. That's the other
Yeah.
thing. We really suck at noticing when we're about to be burnt out. Like our tornado warning is shit.
Oh yeah.
And so that's a big thing that I think we like people need to work on too is like what are the warning signs? Sometimes they're weird, right?
Mhm.
Like I've had situations with people where they say like, "Oh, I get to a point like in a meeting where I am just controlling the meeting and like an hour goes by where I'm like, I've been the only one talking and I'm not letting anyone talk."
Mhm.
And we like worked backwards and figured out that like I can tell when I'm going to do that because before the meeting, I'll know that it's important because I'll change my shirt. And that's how I know it's a
Mm.
really important meeting. And then I always find myself doing that. And I was like, cool. So when you change your shirt, they're like, okay, maybe I need to like take a second and a deep breath and recognize that it might happen again and I need to be aware of it.
Yeah.
And it's just like little things to like, cue us that things are happening. I used to have an elastic band when I was ruminating real hard about some weird shit.
Yeah.
I used to think all my friends were being paid to hang out with me
Mm.
because that was the only way that made sense in my brain that people would want to be my friend, which
Yeah.
is really crazy now when I say it. But at the time, it made sense in my head.
Yeah.
And I had to find a way to like remind myself that I'm ruminating and to take a deep breath and calm myself down. And this came
Mhm.
from like tons of RSD and not knowing what it was.
Yep.
And so I wore an elastic band. And that was kind of like if you've ever seen, what's the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio? With the
The
dreams.
totem
Yeah,
inception.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
One
yeah.
of my
Right.
faves. One of my
So
faves.
like that's what
So
it is.
good.
It was like my totem, this
Yep.
thing of like a reminder to like kind
Mhm.
of snap me out of it.
Mhm.
Um, and start doing some like grounding techniques to kind of calm down my emotions. Cause your emotions that are a 9 or a 10, logic is gone.
Yep.
You're not logically
Yep.
thinking anymore. You're just
Yep.
like problem solving with an emotional brain, and that can really suck.
Yeah. And I've used this quote so many times, but like when I was teenager, one of my friends used to say, when emotions are high, intelligence is low. And I was always like, well, that's really profound, but I don't quite understand it. But really, it's like you can't be, it's like the idea of like the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain is like you can't be on both floors at once. And
Mm-hmm.
like one of them is your emotional brain, and one of them is going to be your logic brain. And you're going to have to climb all the way up to the top story to be able to access the logic brain, to be able to see things with more of like that bird's eye view and have more perspective. When you're down there, you're just all in the stuff and you're perseverating. And like you said, you're in that rumination pattern, right? And so you're just reacting, you're not responding. And so then you get in this cycle where, you think that you're right about everything, and then you make these decisions instinctively, and again in this little like maybe even a low level survival mode, because our bodies thrive on stress and we struggle with regulating, right? And so then you're just kind of there and you're like, and then there's a lot of shame and impacts relationships and all the things. And yeah, I think it's interesting that you shared about like, the different signs. Is like mine is apathy.
Mm-hmm.
I care so much about people and just life, and I want people to be like the best that they can be, and I give so much grace for mistakes and little things and human moments. And even if someone like, because I give a lot to people, I'm a helper, I'm an educator, and like, I've done coaching and things like that.
For sure.
When people come to me even about little things like, what do you think about this, or what do you think about that, even like I was talking to my assistant earlier. She's like, what do you think about this detail? And normally I would have so much care in all of the little details. And I was like, I don't care, post it. I don't care. Like I'm giving up my sense of diving into this. This could be better with this. I'm like, it's good enough. Go. Like that's my
Mm.
sign that I'm like,
Oh,
ooh,
I'm burning out.
this
Yeah.
this is not good, right? And like that's because
Right.
I put so much care into the little details, especially in the
Yeah.
things that I create, and I recognize that, and I'm like, and where it comes from, and that's when you really have to kind of look into things. And when you're saying like we don't recognize those things internally, because when we have neurodivergent brains, we're great with pattern recognition externally.
Mm-hmm.
We
We're
don't
witnessing, yeah.
we don't connect with it. I can tell you what's going to happen in someone's life based on just how they're acting or whatever, how they're going to react to me, whatever. Just even if they're like, I haven't even like seen this person before, but I can see just these little behaviors. I know what this trajectory of this, and like 99% of the time it's right. You know, I'm like,
Right.
I have a really good intuition. Do I have a really good intuition, or have I just gotten really good at recognizing patterns because I've had to learn because my brain doesn't
Sure.
process that way, right? So I
Yeah.
could be both, but
Right.
you have to learn those skills of the self-monitoring piece. And
Yeah.
I have found that not only as an occupational therapist, and I worked with kids who have ADHD or autism or anything else, but also like coaching adults with trauma and other things that would be your brain is working differently and develops differently, is really that the more that we try and internalize, if someone, you say something like, what do you feel? They're like, I don't know. But if I can give you an activity to take that and put it onto paper and logically see
Mm,
something different, and you can see a pattern there or a diagram or whatever. I mean, I do all kinds of activities. Then they
right.
can thrive and be like, oh, that's what that is. But we can't just sit there and be like, huh, I'm feeling kind of off. Why
Right.
is that? This happened. You literally just have to take it from, because like we have all of that hyperactivity in our brain anyway. So let's just process some more things in there, add feelings into the mix, add potential shame or judgment or whatever else that we're putting onto ourselves. Of course it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
And executive functioning challenges, put it into something objective, and then you can start to see a little bit better. And I found that it just makes a world of difference.
Do you think when it comes to like us not recognizing the like these warning signs, a lot of it
Mm-hmm.
also has to do with us not really connecting to our bodies? I think it was
Yes.
I don't know if it was Dodson or Barkley that says that ADHDers are basically just like walking brains. Like it's
Yeah.
we're just brains moving around
Yeah.
because we live in our heads. Like
So
everything's
cerebral.
right here, right?
Yeah.
And everything has to be figured out and logic.
Mm-hmm.
So even for those of us that are super emotional, like we're problem solvers, and so everything has to make sense to us. And
Mm-hmm.
if it doesn't make sense, we make it make sense. We almost can create the,
Yep.
the tie between it, right?
Let me create the story that makes this make sense, whether it's
Right.
true or not. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And then you ruminate, and that's
Yep.
ugly.
Yep. And then there's
Like I don't
anxiety
need
and all of these
facts.
co-occurring diagnoses. It's
Right.
fine.
Yeah.
It's
I
fine.
don't need facts. I don't need to sit there and get like real evidence. I can make it up as I go and create my own story that makes sense in my head.
Oh
Yeah,
man.
it can get real messy. Um, but so yeah, that's my story. No.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, okay.
I think with ADHDers, right, there's so much information out there, some misinformation, sure, but I really love people giving accounts of their own experiences because example, like when I do groups with people, we've got some people that may not relate to everything, right? And so I've said this to people online too, where you know ADHD content might not all be relatable to you because we all
No.
have different experiences, right? But
Yep.
I almost get it almost every time, right? It's either exactly what I'm going through or the exact opposite, where I can like almost go back in my head and be like, wow, if this had happened to me, I would have went hard the other way. Like we're either one way or the other. It's like such an all or nothing thing.
Yep.
And it could always be traced back to be like, yep, that's how I was taught to do that, or that's how my teachers treated me, or that's how my parents decided to like
Yeah.
get me to do this thing. And we end up having these things as adults that we either have to deprogram or give ourselves grace with.
Yeah.
Um, so as I would say, like as an occupational therapist, what when you see someone with ADHD compared to not ADHD, do you treat that differently? Because I always think how I remember when I first went to therapy, my therapist realized pretty early on that it was like, oh, some of these traditional techniques are not going to work for you. Like this is just not it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for those who are unfamiliar, and I'm pretty sure you are, but for the audience who's listening, occupational therapy in itself is a rehabilitation profession that is focused on function. Okay. So
Okay.
it's not like psychotherapy or social work or anything like that. Our roots are in mental health, where we're like 100 years ago trying to get people like re-engaged in the things that they want and need to do with whatever barrier. Like sister professions to physical therapy or speech therapy, just different focuses. So occupational therapy, the root is occupation, which is anything that takes up time. So it's basically helping people overcoming barriers in their daily life, whether that's relationships, like their social emotional skills, whether that's, you know, someone who had a brain injury, someone who like had a stroke and was in the hospital, a child with a developmental disability, adults with ADHD. There's like so many things, right? And so it's just this holistic idea of human development and problem solving and basically activity analysis to be able to support people to get what they need and want to do. So basically, I'm a creative scientific problem solver. That's how my brain was trained, which, hi, neurodivergent brain, that fits beautifully.
Perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. And also because of the neurodivergence, the reason that I ended up choosing this profession out of the others is like I can go into a different setting and it's like a whole different career.
Gotcha.
I just have the skill set. So essentially, when it comes down to working with different people, you treat what you see, not necessarily the diagnosis. But I will say that neurodivergent brains, absolutely, you have to do it differently. And the reason is it has to be so simplified. And I have found very visual in order to support learning styles of someone who is neurodivergent, because there is so much in your brain all the time, very intelligent. But when it comes down to like the social emotional stuff or the daily life stuff, like we're just trying to over process all of these things all the time that sometimes the simple things feel so overwhelming. And so I even say, I tell people, like, even in the way that I teach like scientific information, I teach it differently because one, I had to do this my whole life. I had straight A's and I was that gifted burnout child, but I also had to teach myself this really heavy scientific stuff and break it down and twist it and have all of these, like, you can ask anyone in like my grad school groups. I had these weird mnemonics. I had these totally like out there ways of memorizing things and understanding and conceptualizing because it had to work that way for my brain. I couldn't just look at a research article and be like, this makes sense because of this, right? It just doesn't work that way. So I think that, yes, there is a difference, and a lot of the educational system is not set up for neurodivergence. That's why there's things like this accommodations and things that we would hope would be there, but it's not always the case. Right. So the thing that really bothers me is that adults with ADHD is not a typical setting that I have seen insurance approved for occupational therapy, which blows my mind because the executive function and the daily life skills that people struggle with, that, I mean, I literally have a course at this point on just executive functioning, teaching adaptive strategies, what even executive functioning is, because sometimes the thing that I love about occupational therapy is it's not just, we're going to make you progress and build this skill and do this thing. It's not like we're just like going to build a muscle. Okay. It's like sometimes we have to realize that this isn't going to change. So we need to change the demands of the task, the environment, and adapt how you do it or prioritize based on your energy or whatever it is. And so then you do need adaptive strategies to still be able to do the things, because a lot of the things you have to do in your life is not going to change, but you still have to, and your brain may or may not change, right? Like you have to figure out how to work with it. So it is a lot of adapting. And the resistance that I find is it feels childish and it feels silly and it feels like, well, I shouldn't have to do it this way. Or, you know, like this is stuff that you would do with children. And I don't mean this in by disrespect.
I'm a child. Deep down, we're all children. Like, at what point are we not children, right?
When I work with complex trauma survivors, even just in education or coaching or anything, and anyone who has any form of neurodivergence, a lot of the strategies and even activities that I've used in pediatrics are similar, if not the same. Just not as we're going to pretend this is play. It's literally just like the same type of, because that's how your brain works. Because also your brain develops differently. You do not have a 40-year-old brain. You do not have the same type of executive functioning and all of these things that a typical neurotypical adult would have. I'm sorry. And that sucks. And that's really hard to hear. And I know that you might want to punch me in the face for saying that right now.
I mean, oh, you're talking to your face. I was
Maybe
like, I
I'm
don't
talking
want
to the
to.
people.
I'm like,
I'm
yes,
talking. I know. Let's go,
like,
right? But that's the
but
thing is like you have
yeah,
to accept that. And
totally.
with that, yes, you have to learn differently. You have to be able to know how to adapt and modify. And because these freaking services aren't out there, that's literally why I do what I do and teach the way I do because they're not
I,
there. And
dude,
insurance says no.
I absolutely love how you brought up
Freaking
learning
government.
styles because, yeah, no, honestly, what's so interesting is, especially when we were younger, they used to talk about like, oh, what's your learning style? And
Yep.
now there's proof that people don't have specific learning styles. However, we definitely retain information differently. And I think when it comes to neurodivergence, especially,
Mm-hmm.
I can just realize that if someone's giving me instructions, I have such a difficult time understanding it. We're ordering like dinner and my wife is like reading me the menu and I'm like, you have to hand it to me. I can't. I
Yep.
I'm not going to be able to make a decision.
Yep.
And it's not even that there needs to be a picture. I need to see the words in order
Yep.
for it to make sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so sure, can I listen to instructions and directions and follow through with something? Yes. But it takes so much more of my energy to do that.
Yeah.
And when you have to do that all day, if you're just listening to instructions, you have to figure out something to do. It's why a lot of people doodle. It's why we have, fidget spinners. It's
Mm-hmm.
trying to use our brain in other ways so that it's activated for us to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've learned so many other learning modalities that I absolutely love. One is having this modality where you need to make sense of everything. I can't think
Mm-hmm.
of the name of it right now off the top of my head, but I wish I was like, oh, I should have researched this stuff before we came on here. But we're now talking learning styles,
we improv this. Come on,
right?
we'll
But
figure it
like,
out later.
anyway, I'll probably research it while we're on. So listen to the end of the episode so that you can find out what the answer is. There's probably people listening to this like yelling the answer at me, but anyway,
Love
it's
it.
this like global understanding of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
The learning modality is I have to understand how a thing works in order to understand part of it.
Yeah.
If you gave me a task to do and I don't understand its purpose, how
Mm-hmm.
it's like a full thing, like I can't process it. It doesn't make sense to me,
Yep.
right? There's also this like intuitive like learning modality where it's like if I'm not sitting there thinking about it, I can make it happen, but we overthink. So that we struggle with. And then my favorite one is like being able to teach something.
Yep.
I learn from teaching.
Yep.
If I can, when I was first started posting on TikTok, I was going through coaching training and was having a blast. Just every time I learned something, making a video about it and putting my own spin on it and own
Yep.
perspective.
Yep.
And that was how I retained it.
Yep.
I wish I knew that when I was back in school and be
Yep.
like, oh wow, when I teach this information, I would have like bugged my parents all the time, be like, hey, let me teach you this lesson that I learned, kind of thing.
Yep.
And so when I talk with parents too, I tell them like there's so many different ways for people to learn. And unfortunately, the like school system and even the like workforce when you're an adult is just like, hey, this is the way we do it and this is what you have to deal with it, right?
Yep.
Um, there's there's that idea of like when I'm pacing, I can learn better, right? When I'm on the phone, I am walking through the house.
Me
That's
too.
how I stay focused, right?
Me too.
And so like there's all these different things that we do and don't realize. And I think that's why it's so important for people to talk with other ADHDers, to
Mm-hmm.
talk with therapists, talk with coaches, talk with the community, because the more you're able to be aware of the things you do, the more you're going to be like, well, wait a second, right? Like when I need to learn something, I can try doing these couple things. So this is like the stuff in my toolbox, right?
Yeah.
Or like, that doesn't work, but maybe this will. And this worked for a while and now it doesn't. So now I need to like re-up what it is that I'm going to do to make my life easier. And I think we like we just have this brain that just constantly wants to figure stuff out. And so if we're not feeding it, it's almost like having a like Australian shepherd. Like if you don't run it every day, it's going to tear up the house. And it's like
But
that's what
it's
our
so
brain does,
cute.
right?
Yeah.
Like our brain is just
Yeah.
like, oh shit, we've got to give ourselves things to figure out, or we're going to create our own things to figure out.
Yep.
And you know, there's all these problems that can arise from it, right? We talk about what's in the DSM, and then you go on TikTok or Instagram and you're like, oh, that's an ADHD thing, that's an ADHD thing. And it's not that they're like secondary things, right? Like when they say, we're like, oh, does anybody else do this? And everybody's like, holy shit. Right? Like I 100%, I can't think of anything, but like it ends up being that secondary symptom where it's like the reason all of us are doing this is because of impulsivity, or it's because of emotional dysregulation.
Like over-explaining is an example for me, that like
Exactly.
everyone is like has to justify the thought process. Also, like the verbal processors, like I have not met someone with ADHD who is not a verbal processor. Like I'm like, I don't need you to tell me what to do. I just need to hear myself think out loud, so then I know the answer. Like
exactly. It doesn't make sense in my head unless I, like when I had to call the nurse to be like, hey, I'm having a heart attack. Wait, no, I'm not.
Never mind.
I had to say it out loud first, but like have it make sense. It like all of these things, right? Like that people that don't understand it are just going to look at the symptoms. When I was diagnosed when I was younger, at the time it was, I kind of look at ADHD as a disorder of a problem for other people. Now it's a disorder of a problem for everyone, right? Which I think is fantastic, because we're actually asking people what it's like to have ADHD. At the time that I was diagnosed, it was other people were upset that I wasn't doing what I was supposed to, or what I was told, or I should be doing a certain thing. So that was, you know, my teachers saying, man, we love Ron, but he does not shut up. And like, and he talks to me, like the teacher would be like, he'd get me off task for like 30 minutes and we'd be talking about something. And it was that understanding that like, oh, we need to control the symptom, right? Like we need to control the fact that he's talking too much. We need to control the fact that he can't turn in his homework. We need to control the fact that his backpack looks like, you know, a disaster. And it wasn't the reason that it was happening. It's just like putting a band-aid on it, right? And so I think now that everyone's talking about ADHD, we're finding underlying causes, and we're kind of saying like, okay, sure, you are struggling to get out of bed in the morning from ADHD, right? We thought it was depression. It turns out it's ADHD, and you're all this shame from these things that, wow, if we give you some medication and you get some help around this thing, and we get you, and really what it is, it's the night before you're struggling to do this, or you're not giving yourself enough like downtime the day before, and so you have this revenge bedtime, and it's like we're backtracking constantly till we get to the fact that it's like, hey, your brain is pissed that you're treating it like crap. And it's like you were saying, I love treating my brain and telling people to treat their brains as like a little kid version of themselves. Like
100%.
What's your brain want, right? Your brain wants to go get ice cream. Your brain wants to like go have a good time. Your brain wants something to just feel good, right? Like I've made the analogy before that like you are the boss of your whole self. You're the boss of your body, the boss of your brain, the boss of your soul. It's your job to be a good boss. And as we're learning in the corporate world, being a strict, shitty boss is not going to get the most out of your employees.
No.
You want to be the boss that brings in donuts in the morning, that makes it a fun work environment, the boss that lets you play music, the boss that like lets you go home early on Fridays because you did really good earlier in the, like all of that stuff. And you have to start with like changing the culture around it, right? If you're someone that's like, okay, I'm going to be the new manager of this company, I go in and the previous manager was shit, how am I going to change this culture? I can't just expect them to do a certain thing and then reward them. I'm going to change it right from the bat. Tell you what, everybody, we're going to go home an hour early today, right? I really appreciate you all, and I know shit stuff. So we're going to do that. Hey, everyone, tomorrow I'm taking you out to lunch. Hey, let's go and do this week, right? Like, let's throw some music on in here. Does anybody need just like a minute? Let's just like go take a walk, whatever it is. And we don't do that for ourselves. We expect ourselves to perform at outrageous standards before we give ourselves whatever it is, right? we don't just deserve to be treated well for just being here in this world that, you know, can be really fucking hard. And so
Truly.
it's once you give yourself that, you find that you're more likely to get some other things that you want accomplished. But you've
Yeah,
got to make the culture change first.
I agree.
And like another thing people aren't ready for is like sometimes when you're changing, and I'm sure you have had this experience, when you're changing these coping mechanisms that you've developed your whole life that are giving you stress and anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
and you're replacing them with something else, you first removing them, and then
Yeah.
you're introducing new ones that are going to take some time to develop. So
Yep.
that means the results ain't coming. Like the
No.
results at first
I
are
can't
going to
have
look
my
weird,
instant gratification and then I get mad. Oh
right?
yeah.
And
Oh
you're like,
yeah.
no, I got to
Oh
go
yeah.
back to the shame thing because that was the only thing that felt
Mm-hmm.
safe.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
you know, it happens a lot with parents when they're just like, wow, my kid's not doing well in school, and like a month later it'd be like, he failed a test, and I'm like, yeah, because he's working on figuring out how to
Yep.
start getting motivated. And
Yeah.
it's like it is an invisible process. We are trying to uncover things that no one else sees, that we don't see for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes we got to find the boogeyman in the closet and put like a sheet over it to see what it looks like,
Yeah.
but and have somebody help us figure it out. And it's a process.
It is. And it's a
Yeah,
perspective shift and
totally.
dysregulating. And then we have all of these like self-worth triggers come up and just all of these things with all of any kind of change we make in our lives, right? Like it has to be me. If this isn't this immediate result, then there's something wrong with me or how I'm doing it, because we are so in our brains and we're over processing all the time, overthinking. We need to see thing, result, thing, result, thing,
We live
result.
in a society that's what it's about, right?
Truly.
Result based society. Like, doesn't
But
matter
they
what you
can
do
do
as
it.
long as you get it done. True. Yeah.
They can make it happen
Yeah.
faster, right? Because they can just be like, oh, right. It's similar thing of what I think of is like, I mean neurotypical, but
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's similar to what I'm thinking of is like when we learn about habit formation and how that it's so automatic and just instinctual at some point for anyone who has a neurotypical brain. It was not
That's been
neurodivergent.
going around a lot lately, and that blew my mind, right?
Well, okay, so for people who have
Yes.
not
It's
like been, this has been all over ADHD TikTok and like honestly everywhere. But here's the thing: is like us neurodivergent humans have gotten together and realized that like people who have a neurotypical brain, if you just tell them to get ready for the day, they just basically have this program that goes, whoop, get ready,
just
and
one input.
instinctively goes through the
Yeah.
spot. That's it. We have got to do this, then this, then this, then turn on the water, then get up and walk, then got to do this, and got to make sure this is matched. All the littlest tiny things. So a task like a 10-minute get ready routine is like 100 little steps.
Yeah.
So of
It's
course
not
it
just
feels
getting ready.
overwhelming.
Exactly.
Mm.
Totally.
And we have to make it happen every time. And then people are like, well, why can't you brush your teeth regularly? Or why can't, like, why are
Because
you
I'm
just
already in
sitting there doing?
bed.
I'm like, the moment that when I come home, if I'm like, I need to do chores or whatever, the moment that I sit down, it's over.
Yeah.
I have to just, an object in motion stays in motion.
Yeah.
We're gonna do the dishes real fast as much as I can. And then I sit down, it's like, it's over for the night. It's done.
Yeah.
Like if I need to make, I do not get to relax and then get up and do something. There's no like,
Totally.
take a break and then whatever else. And that's because there's so many other things that come into this, then this, then this, then this, where if I'm already on just like I'm in the busy program and keep going, it's a little bit easier. It's still not easy, but it's a little bit easier. But like starting the thing when it's like it's the same thing when like we think about if someone is so stressed and you're just telling them you have so much to do right now, you have to do this right now, and you're putting a lot of pressure on it, and it's like I don't have the capacity. That's like our brain all the time is just filled up with this mental load of this step, then this step, then this step, and that I don't even want to think about how I'm letting down my relationships. I don't even want to think about this shame spiral. I don't even want to think about what's going on in the world right now. How my heroes are letting me down. I can't even think about any of that because right in front of me right now is you got to go do the laundry. And that's a whole lot of steps. And that takes up this much space in your brain. And there's already so much in that cup because of the world around you. So figure out how to manage it. Oh, and also you struggle with self-regulation because that's actually part of the freaking disorder. So good luck.
Dude, when people come to me and I ask them what it is they want to work on, a lot of times they end up telling me the thing they think they should do, which isn't what they should work on. But the answer ends up always being like, I need to develop a routine.
Yeah.
And I'm like, girl, listen. It's like the routine that you're thinking of developing is great in theory, right? But
Yeah.
like we have to start way before then because like you were saying, the energy that it requires for us to do a quote unquote easy thing is way different than someone else. And so we're looking at what society tells us is easy and required all day, every day.
Yeah.
And yet we're probably fantastic at puzzles or this thing or that thing, right? And we have our like specialties and creativities and things that people are amazed that we can do so well, but those things aren't required every day, every morning to get ready for stuff, right? And so like a lot of things that I do with people, and it's we always talk about wins, right? And at first when I ask somebody what their win is, they always give me like an answer of something like amazing that everyone would agree is a win. And then I always give them a win that like only a few people are going to understand, because I tried to make the whole point behind this is like a win is something that is hard for me to do.
Yeah.
That I was able to do.
Yeah.
I made a doctor's appointment yesterday that I was putting off for 2 weeks because, oh my gosh, the amount of thought that goes into it and the fear that I'm not going to know exactly what to answer when they ask me certain questions, or that I'm going to have to look up my schedule and there might be some shame around it, or they might say something to me that I don't understand, or whatever it is. All of that goes into it for me. And that's why I put off making a doctor's appointment. Or maybe they're going to put me on hold for 10 minutes. Holy shit, do not put me on hold for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Right? And so the anticipation that all those things might happen make that one of the most difficult things for me to do in my life.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we have to sit there and like I have people number system how hard certain tasks are for you. It doesn't matter why, right? I realized a long time I couldn't figure out why, but I hated doing the dishes, especially the part of putting the dishes in the dishwasher.
Yep.
I have no problem pulling the dishes out and putting them away. Which is weird because I hate putting stuff away, but dishes, no problem for me. Couldn't figure out why. My wife was the opposite. And so then we kind of realized like, oh shit, we can like split this up because this one's less difficult for me than this part, right? And then I realized like one day when I had to do it, oh my gosh, I hate sticking my hands in like dirty water or soapy water. I have this like weird feeling with it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's why. I had no idea why. I just realized like that was a hard task for me.
Yep.
And so to be able to like label each individual task that we're doing, that lets us know like, okay, this is a 1. So if I don't have a ton of energy, I know that I can get these ones done.
Yep.
This is a 2. This is a 3. This one's a 5. This one, like making a doctor's appointment, I need to like give myself a half hour prep beforehand and like reward myself with an hour of just like scrolling TikTok afterwards to feel better. Because that's an intense, difficult thing for me. And when we're able to release the shame of this thing that should be easy, it makes it so much better for us because we can do hard things. We can do hard things that are hard for us. We can do things that are hard for others and easy for us, but we never sit there and celebrate it, right? I remember I always ask clients like, what is something that you've celebrated recently? And they're like, well, this thing was really easy for me to do, so it's not a big deal. And then this thing was hard for me to do, but nobody else would think it's hard, so it's not a big deal. And I'm like, so you're saying nothing you do is worth like being proud of? Because that's what ends up happening to us, right? You're like, yeah, of course I did this thing I helped my friend move, and then I took him to the airport and I was there for him when he needed me, and he was really sad about the situation at work, and I sat there and did all this, and I'm like, that's incredible. And they're like, yeah, but I love doing that. It's easy. And you're like, yeah, but that's a fucking awesome human being you just were. And we never give ourselves credit for it. And then the flip side, I brush my teeth twice a day, but everyone should brush their teeth twice. And I'm like, yeah, but I like have worked so hard to do that because I hate getting up once I'm in bed, or it's so boring, or whatever the reason is. That's a hard task for me to do. So I'm going to celebrate the shit out of it. I brush my teeth twice a day. sure, the first time was before we got on this call, but like I'm gonna do it again tonight, right? Like
Yep.
there's
Yep.
it's like take more wins and realize that like you're trying. I don't know a single
Hmm.
ADHDer that honestly thinks that they're not trying.
Truly.
We're all trying so fucking hard.
Hmm.
And it's not about how hard we're trying to in our eyes a lot of times. It's what the result is. And
Yep.
you've got to figure out a way to release that. It's hard because this is the world we live in, but like the more you give yourself credit for the things that you're trying to do,
Hmm.
for showing up for other people, whether it's for other people, whether it's showing up for yourself, right? Whether it's giving someone perspective, whether it's showing a bit of kindness, whether it's brushing your teeth twice a day, whatever it is, like you did it and it was hard for you, or it was easy for you and it was appreciated by someone else.
Hmm.
Awesome job.
Yeah, I agree. And it's like, we have to be able to celebrate those wins, and also the judgment and like the self-judgment can be amplified from those around us. And I think
Totally.
especially when you get this, when you're around people who don't understand, or you grew up where you were invalidated, or you grew up where you were traumatized and there was other things going on top of ADHD, because there's a whole bunch in the community
There's
that
so
have
many
complex
comorbidities for
trauma.
sure. Yeah. Well, yeah,
And
that
yeah,
too.
like complex trauma and ADHD or anxiety and depression and all of
Go
these like
hand in hand.
comorbidities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people are like waking up and realizing like, oh, this was actually really invalidating and whatever. And especially those who are late diagnosed, I'm just treated like, oh, you're lazy or whatever, or all of these things that we hold so much shame for, that even giving ourselves that self-compassion is such a huge feat because of all of that stuff we have against us. And recognizing too that even when we get it done is done. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm talking to
100%.
myself right now, thinking of all the things that I'm like, oh, I could be doing this,
I know.
and I'm just like, wow, if only I had me in my ear all the time, verbal processing, giving myself a pep talk right here.
I'm
No, but
great at
really,
telling other people like good advice, and just taking myself is hard, but
it's
that
so
is what I'm
hard.
working on,
It
right? Like,
is.
yeah,
But we also like, sometimes if you can't do it, instead of just giving up, maybe it's, I need help. I need a different way to approach this. I need a
oh
different
yeah,
strategy. I need to understand why executive functioning in the brain works that way. We can hyper focus on things. Why not hyper focus on understanding the brain? Why not, like, why not hyper focus on understanding why certain things work the way they do, and then go to someone who needs like to get help, like come to me or come to Ron or whatever like applies to you. Look for supports out there. And even if you're like, oh, I don't have the resources, the time, or that feels overwhelming right now, start looking at ADHD TikTok. People are sharing things they're doing all the time. Like, give yourself permission to do something differently. And if it's not working, it doesn't mean that it's you. It means that you need to change the approach somewhere, either the priority or how you do it. Done is done. And sometimes, like you said, we just have to take those wins. But the small wins are the big wins. And when we invalidate ourselves, we're not going to find that. And then we're never going to feel like we're getting any progress. And I feel like that's with any kind of mental health disorder, trauma, anything. When your brain works differently, it's really hard to give yourself credit when everyone else thinks that you should be able to do such and such and such. You are the only one who knows your internal experience, period. So you have to be your
everyone's
biggest cheerleader.
experience is right between their ears. That's it. Like
Yeah.
that is what you
Yeah.
have. I remember talking to my therapist once about talk about somebody that hyper focuses on something, but I watched a video where someone was, it was kind of incorrect, which is why it sent me down a rabbit hole, right? But they were just saying
Yeah.
like
Fair.
you, based in truth, it said you should not rely on external validation.
Mm-hmm.
And if what they said, that kind of was like, if you are someone that loves external validation, you need to change that. And I was like, I love external validation. Oh
Mm-hmm.
no. And so I went down this like research rabbit hole, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I talked to my therapist and I was like, is it bad that I really like external validation? He goes, no. Are you what? He's like,
You're
dude, we're
looking for
human.
dopamine. Like,
We're
what?
humans, right? Like
Uh,
we build community. We love validation from other people. It's not wrong to.
yeah.
It is just that when we are just looking for it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at it in terms of like a box that you fill up, right? And the more validation points you get, the better off you are. And maybe external validation, just one, like almost fills the box, right?
Yeah.
And getting it from yourself is less. It's about
Mm-hmm.
like a quarter of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe even a tenth of it. That means that 10 more times you have to validate yourself to equal that.
Yep.
And especially at first, this is gonna sound cheesy, right? But like it sucks. Like validating yourself sucks. My wife and I, when we're really down, will do a victory dance for no reason to
Mm-hmm.
just like trick ourselves into thinking that we should be celebrating something because it
Yep.
feels good to celebrate shit, right? Have
Yep.
you ever celebrated something and not been happy about it? No, you love that.
Mm-hmm.
And so do it for no reason. You don't have to have a reason. At
Yep.
first you're gonna think it's weird. You know, my wife will like if I'm down, she'll be like, do you want to do a victory dance? It's like, no, I don't. And then she's like, Alexa, play whatever. And
Yep.
right, she'll be like, play Katy Perry, like, some like really intense, like, anthem, so to speak. And I'm
Yep.
just like, this is so dumb. This is so dumb. And then she starts dancing, and then I just kind of like move a little bit and like sure. And
Yep.
by the end of it, we're laughing and having
Yep.
a good time, and it feels
Yep.
better, right?
Yep.
And it sounds cheesy, and like when we start off wins, sometimes people are like, okay, well, I made a doctor's appointment, but it took me 2 months to do it, or like there's always this negative with it.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got to get better at just being like, I made a doctor's appointment, whatever, right?
Did that.
and and so like it is a bit of like the fake it till you make it thing, but the idea behind it is that we're not good at validating ourselves usually. It
Mm-mm.
takes practice,
Yeah.
and you have to start somewhere. And so even if that is just like having a victory dance in the morning or looking for something at the end of the day to be proud of,
Mm.
as little as it is, whatever it is, like finding a thing, um, you get better at it, and you start to realize that that box that you needed filled now doesn't need to be filled as much because you're already filling it yourself.
Yep.
And yeah, it's not perfect, and I sit here saying like sometimes I forget about it, forget about the box, and I'm looking for external validation, or
Yep.
I'm sitting there having some really shitty negative self-talk. But when you work at it, it's a lot easier to fill.
Mm-hmm.
And dude, when the box is filled, like things are better. Like I don't know, if anybody's like, I want to better my life, like then you got to fill the box.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard at first, but like, yeah.
I always say that the way that I turned, like I used to hate myself. I didn't even know who I was. I felt like I was a
Yep.
shell of a human being. I was like an empty shell that just keeps getting passed along the waves. And it's like, oh, it shows up, it does what it's supposed to do, but it rolls back in the ocean. Like it has no control, right? And it really took me like devoting to, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired and hating myself. And I'm going to show up as if I love myself before I do. And eventually it got to this point of, okay, so I would do all this stuff for other people. What would I do for myself? How would I
Yep.
talk to how would I talk to someone I love if this happened?
I
How would
love that.
I
Yeah.
whatever, right? And so it became like a consistent thing, also like all of these like cognitive redirection things and like kind of what you were talking about earlier when you had like the wrist snapping, right?
Yeah.
I was always the one, I did like the cognitive redirection strategy of like no Taylor whenever I had this like negative self-talk, the amount of
Sure.
times that I would call myself an idiot or crazy or
Yep.
whatever. Like also I had this narrative because like I was raised by a narcissist. So like I was like very psychologically abused. So it was a little bit more intense for me to like work through that. And sometimes it's still there, but 10 plus years of healing and all this stuff. But anyways, so it's just sitting there and like every single time a tiny thing would pop up, like, oh, I'm an idiot, I should have done this better or whatever, I would literally be like, no, Taylor, you are a human who is healing and you are imperfect and you are learning. Next. Like I would always like stop myself, and I would usually do like a stop sign. Like I would like push out some kind of motion that would like give my brain the indicator, like, nope, we're redoing this. Some people say things like cancel or delete or whatever, but I would just be like, no, and then just say the opposite in whatever it is. Cause like eventually that alone is not going to change things, but like that with action and working through things and figuring out where the triggers come from or whatever it is, like that's a really good start. So once you recognize what's happening, it's like, how am I going to force myself into recognizing what's happening and then redirect and then try and give myself some compassion or whatever. But it was consistently 6 months every single time that I was shaming myself, that it was like, no, you're a human who's imperfect. Moving on. What's next?
Yeah.
No, you're a badass. No, you're not a failure. You've succeeded in all these ways. Next. Like, and it's not even like I wouldn't let myself ruminate on it, because if I would, then I'd try and pick apart how that was wrong. It was like, no, moving on. No, moving on. It's like a teacher's trying to rush you in class kind of thing. I was like, keep going. But then I would do deeper stuff, obviously. But
Sure.
you
It's
had to
important to do that
redirect.
because it's a boulder rolling downhill. So just you have to redirect the boulder when it's doing that. You can't stop it and heal it right there, right?
No,
When you're ruminating, it's not about, you want to answer a question that's unanswerable usually, right? Like, why am I a piece of shit? Right? Like, or whatever it is. And it's like you're not asking the right question.
Yeah.
And so instead we're gonna, and I've joked about this with, I was like, use your distractibility, right? Like, use your ADHD and distract yourself. And be like, hey, we're gonna come back to this. I've even made promises with myself where I'm like, okay, we're gonna put a pin in this, and I'm not forgetting about it. I'm not saying you're wrong, right? But like, we'll come back in 10 minutes. Let's go walk the dog. And I'll come back and it's like, yeah, I don't know why I was in that headspace before. And that's really what it is. And then you work on it, sure. But like, in those moments, you can't work on yourself. You have to you have to move it aside. I this was making me think of something that I really have been trying to get across to parents. And I think it's so, kind of like you were saying before, I think it's important for everyone because we end up growing up as ADHDers having to self-parent anyway. But for parents, understanding that when you have a child, there's society, I think, has kind of taught us as parents to mold them into what is expected. So if you see undesirable traits, you either shame them, you even like trying to like redirect them or ignore them or push them down or whatever it is. And those aren't things that then go away. Those are parts of you that just get hidden and they become like the deep dark of us, which is why we grow up hating ourselves, because that deep darkness that we were told is not what's acceptable was not worked on and like learned how to cope in the world. It was just told it can't be here, so we hide it. And then we grow up and it's still a part of us, and we then hate that version of ourselves. We hate that part of us. And so often I tell parents that like children are raw traits, just a shit ton of raw traits that none of it makes sense in the world, right? I always give people this like character assessment that tells you like your 24 character like strengths. And a lot of times with kids, I'll point out, like, let's say their character strength, this raw strength, is humor. They're witty, they get it, they understand humor, right, from like a super young age. They're not going to be this like 6-year-old with like amazing, impeccable, comedic timing, able to read a room, understand when to use humor and when not to. It's just this raw ability to just like pick their spots, right? And I like to use the analogy of like a scorpion, because growing up in Arizona, they always told you to like be really careful of the baby scorpions because they don't know how to control their venom. They just like unload the whole thing and that's it. And then they learn as they get older, and they learn from using their venom and realizing that they don't have any more and they have to produce more, that they need to control it better. But they're not told from their parent scorpion to control it better. They're not like shamed into controlling it better. They learn from using it, from experiencing it. We learn from doing as humans. And so often a kid will do something unacceptable, right? Like, say this kid with this trait of humor tells a joke at a funeral or something that is just not right, or they pick the wrong spot, or they say something that's offensive to somebody and don't realize it. So often the immediate reaction is like, don't do that. And what that ends up doing is taking that entire trait and telling it you're not welcome here. And that happens to us in so many different ways. I've seen kids that their trait was kindness, but they were like taken advantage of. And so they were kind of taught, don't use this trait anymore. And they grow up hiding that bit of them and actually being ashamed for being kind, right?
Yeah.
Being ashamed for having humor, being ashamed. Like, I've had people that take this character strength test and they go, yeah, that's a bad trait to have. And I go, none of these are bad traits, none of them. But we've learned to hate some of them because we're like,
Yeah.
yeah, humor is my number one strength, but like, what good is that, right? Like, that just means that I don't take things seriously. And I'm like, no, that's one of, because the trait isn't inherently good or bad. That is just something that's happened to you that you've now associated with it. And
Yep.
so as kids, we're like molded by being told certain things that are us are not okay. And it's not that they're not okay, it's just that they were underdeveloped and unnurtured things that happened with us that we
Yep.
needed to understand.
Yep.
And we grow up hating that part of ourselves. And
Yep.
so we as adults have to reparent by reintroducing that part and teaching ourselves that it's okay. And it's going to be messy, like it would have been if we did it when we were a kid. That's what you're supposed to learn, things by doing messy. And we have to do it as adults and we have to be okay with it. Like, going through all this process is messy. It's not going to be perfect. And we can't expect everything to come out looking perfect, but we do. And so, like, where do you start, right? Do you start by making it okay to just fuck things up? Or do you start with like teaching yourself to give yourself grace? Do you start with, being okay with being imperfect? It's figuring out where your step one is. Step one isn't always, I have to figure out how to motivate myself, or I've got to learn how to get my work in on time. Step one might be like, I need to be okay with fucking up.
Yeah.
A lot of us are not okay with that.
Yeah. And, also if you're like, where is that step one is like being okay with not being okay is a huge part of it, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But also like when we start using strategies, one of my favorite things about occupational therapy that they teach you is like figure out who the person is, figure out their values and their habits and their routines and what's really meaningful. And there's so much research that shows that if something is really meaningful to someone, they're going to invest that much more into it. And they're going to be able to access the ability to start making progress or start putting effort in or whatever, like not giving up as much. Because here's the thing, if something is so meaningful to you, you're going to make it happen, even if there are the roadblocks and the obstacles and the whatever it is, right? And so, but it's also recognizing that you're going to have to be able to shift how you do it and figuring out your strengths and using your strengths to support your areas of improvement in order to figure life out, right? And that's why self-development is a thing. That's why it's such a huge thing in this world, is just like we have to be able to recognize that like every single human has this own unique, wonderful qualities to them and no one else can be them. But like you said, there's so much masking. And in the neurodivergent communities, especially, it's like we're finally talking about unmasking and what that means, right? And I can tell you, I have worked with neurodivergent kids. I have done for like an hour at a time. I've done nannying for a few hours at a time. It's exhausting. It really is. It does take a lot of capacity. It does take self-regulation and self-awareness and the patience and all of those things on the adult side of things. So like, I get it. Sometimes it's just like, it's not possible and they don't have the tools, they don't have the skills. There is no blame in it. But just recognizing that if you have to go back and start building that capacity, you really, really have to just look inward and build those things within you. Give yourself that grace and then say, hey, this is the path we're going to attempt to take using this part of you. And instead of trying to push this down or shame them and fit in society's mold, we're raising this new generation of kids with gentle parenting and saying, you're allowed to be exactly who you are, and recognizing that every single person is unique and has these beautiful, wonderful gifts to bring to the world. Everyone, no one else can be that person. And so it is not our job anymore to extinguish their individuality, instead embrace it. And I would say as a collective shift, we're doing that. But a lot of us now, the adults, are realizing that, and we're having to redo that for ourselves.
Yep.
Right? Like, and that's literally like That's what I teach people. Come back to yourself.
Yeah.
It's not about the healing tools. It's not about, I'm going to give you a step-by-step guidebook. Anyone who does anything like that just wants your money. You're going
Yep.
to do this, then this, then this, then this, then this. I am the only one who can teach you how to do this. And this is the absolute best method.
I can't tell you shit. You're the one that knows
Bullshit.
how to do it. Exactly.
Exactly.
Right.
I am here with some, I am like, I have some tools, I have some skills. I can teach you. I love how you talk. Same thing. I'm the toolbox person too. I'm like, I'll give you some tools. But if you don't know what tools to choose, if you don't listen to yourself, if you don't let yourself drive the conversation or anything in your own journey, I am useless. It is you. You are the one who intuitively knows what your body needs. Even when you were talking about earlier with, sensory stuff, like you're like, I have to move in order to get my brain to work or refocus, or when I'm on the phone or whatever.
Right.
Your body knows that.
Yeah. You weren't,
No
if you
one
were
else
helping
can
me,
tell you
you
that.
weren't going to be able to be like, Ron, you should try doing that. Like,
No.
I had to figure that out. And
Yeah.
so often people will ask, they're like, I think this is a big thing with millennials too. So I'm
Sorry.
not sure, but what's that?
I said sorry. No, I'm just kidding. I was just apologizing for millennials. No, we love it. No,
But
you're good.
well, I'm an elder millennial, so but I look at it as my biggest step one, like going back to step one thing was like I had to give myself permission. I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if we were just taught how to follow instructions and fall in line and like ask for permission to do things.
Yeah.
And then one day we didn't have to ask anymore and we were just like, what? Like, no,
How?
someone has to say it's okay for me to do this.
Yeah. So true.
And so I think especially with this thing of like when I have clients that are just they're waiting for me to tell them what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, dude, I can't tell you what to do. Like based on what you've told me, and I'm not gonna sit there and us just like sit in silence. So I say kind of thing like, do you want me to give you like a suggestion maybe? And I was like, okay. So something I do is this. And what is great about ADHD is we have associative thinking. So it can spark some ideas, which is awesome, right? Where they're like, well, that won't work for me. But like, I don't know, I guess I could try that. I'm like, okay, will that work for you? And they're like, yeah, I'm just worried that this might happen. You're like, okay, so how can we make sure that doesn't happen? And that's what we're trying to figure out, right? We're trying to give people permission to just like, well, what if it doesn't work? Then you find out it doesn't work. Like you try something else, right? And it's so hard for us because again, it comes to that failure thing. That's like, well, if something doesn't work, that feels bad. Like I don't enjoy that.
So
and
bad.
That's a deterrent, right? And it's like that's what sucks. If anything, when we talk about gentle parenting, it is really about encouraging trial. It's encouraging empowering people to make decisions.
Yeah.
Like we're not empowered as ADHDers because a lot of times people would see us doing things in a weird way to them, our neurodivergent way, and they're like, you're doing it wrong. That's not going to work. And it's like, that's why we end up being innovators, right? Because we find unique ways to do things. But we're a lot of times afraid to try unique ways because we've been told they're wrong.
Yep.
Anyway, I could talk about this forever. I wanted to bring up one thing we were talking about yesterday. And I was thinking about it a lot today and talking about the difference between when just how I've seen, especially my age, but men my age and how they struggle with one, asking for help.
Yeah.
And then two, their emotions, right? We had said something earlier, how like you can't logically think when you are emotional. Like it's like the upstairs, downstairs thing.
Yep.
And the I guess you could say the toxic, masculinity that was, embedded into me at a young age went like, wow, there's going to be people that say, and that's why women suck. Like I literally heard that in my head. Right. And I was just
it's
like,
it's there.
What's so interesting is like the thing that I've learned and the thing that I try to talk to a lot of men about, especially ones that are having difficulty in their relationships, is that kind of like we were saying about traits, when you aren't showing emotions on the outside, that doesn't mean you're not having them. Like men have so many emotions, and
Yep.
the only thing we think are allowed on the outside, because society told it's changing, but society does kind of tell us like you're allowed to be angry,
Yeah.
right? You're allowed to show like that type of passion, but you can't show sadness, you can't
Yeah.
cry,
Yeah.
you can't show weakness, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that in fact just stacks emotion.
Hmm.
So talk about having difficulty thinking
Yeah.
when little things are causing these emotional outbursts inside of us, whether you don't see them on the outside, right? Whether it's that like
Yep.
duck on a pond where like the
Yep.
legs are going nuts underneath, like we struggle to make decisions because of those emotions. So if you're a dude out there going like, well, I'm not super emotional, um, if you have ADHD, there's a very good chance it's not in the DSM yet, but we're
Yeah.
pretty sure it's all about emotions. You're probably pretty
Yeah.
emotional and you're just pushing that shit down.
Yeah.
And that's worse because it needs somewhere to go. So you are just collecting it. Like we were
Hmm.
talking about the box earlier. You're just putting more emotions in that box and it is filled to the brim and you're taping it to the sides and shit. And that is not great. So
Yeah.
um what a, usually with men when we talk about step one, it really has to do with like unpacking what emotions mean to them, because even
Hmm.
myself, I was very lucky that I was always allowed, and I say always, but like still being a man in this world was, I wasn't always allowed, but
Yeah.
for the most part I've found myself in spaces where it was okay and
Hmm.
acceptable to be emotional and to talk about feelings, so I'm very lucky for that.
Yeah.
But that ends up needing to be the thing. So a lot of men do need to just like, they need to go to therapy to heal that part of themselves before they can like
Truly.
take any steps forward, because that is what, happens in those moments when emotions are high. um you can't make the decision that you want to. You don't have agency over your decisions anymore.
Nope.
And that is the problem that we see with communication with other people. um
Hmm.
it when your emotions are high, you think you're communicating really well, but usually you are talking at people, right? You're not, the communication is two-sided and you are not taking anything in. And that's another thing that we've never really been taught as dudes to understand. um
And you're interpreting any kind of communication at you where your internal response is elevated as like an attack
yeah,
or like
everything's heightened, yeah,
blame or whatever,
right,
like even if that's not what someone is saying in a tone or whatever, it's just like you go into that defense mode. Whether
sure,
you fire back at it or you internalize it, there is this defense that pops up when you can't
yeah.
internalize and like figure
the,
out what's happening.
this idea that like people
Hmm.
that are emotional are the ones that show it is not, it's just like, scrap that idea. If anybody out
No.
there has it, there's like, that's just not what it is. Like
Yeah.
you can't see whether someone's emotional or not. We
Mm-mm.
say it, right? We will say like, oh, that person's emotional because they're showing their emotions, but like showing your emotions is putting your emotions somewhere that's not inside. So it's
Yeah.
great actually.
Yeah.
um and but yeah, that communication thing is so tough. One something that my wife and I have had to do is like when one of us, because we both have ADHD, so struggle with that. We have this like saying that I think, talk about like having our like little totem, so to speak, but like
Hmm.
we just say like same team.
Hmm.
um because so often, like you said, you get defensive and it feels like a battle.
Yeah.
It feels like, you have to win.
Yeah.
And when you realize that like both people want ultimately the same thing, which is to be happy in their relationship together, right?
Hmm.
Whatever that means, to have a good life together. If, which I hope, if you're in a relationship with somebody, that's what you want.
Yeah.
You say like same team, we want that. Sure,
Hmm.
there's other things, we have disagreements, we have different perspectives, we may disagree on how things should be, but like if we ultimately want that, like if we start there and work backwards, great. Emotions can get in the way, so be like same team. And we've done that thing where, kind of similar when you're ruminating with yourself, my wife and I do it. It's called like fighting fair, but it's like, okay, we're emotional right now, we're going to be fighting amongst each other. It's like if
Yeah.
you ever watch sports and you see teammates fighting amongst each other, ain't great, not good for team chemistry.
Yeah.
You separate them and you let the emotions go down. So we'll like, hey, I need a second, I need either 5 minutes, I need 10 minutes, I need an hour, I'm going to go take the dog for a walk, I'm going to go watch TV by myself, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
and then work on de-escalating that shit.
Yeah.
And I hate how a lot of my species really struggles with that.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
feel it, I get it, right? Like,
Yeah.
even as someone that's been allowed to be that emotional person, there's still this expectation. And so I totally understand.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of uh programs out there and groups for men to at least feel like they have a space where they can talk about shit. And I think if you're a guy out there listening, or if you know a guy out there that wants that or
Yeah.
that needs that, like,
Yeah.
find ways to encourage that, because we really need spaces where we don't feel judged, where we can just like talk about shit. And
Mm-hmm.
not enough of us think it's okay to reach out for help. So one of the best things I ever did was go to therapy. It changed my life. And I think I was always worried that they were going to make me feel bad about myself, or that therapy was going to, I don't know, change me in a way I didn't want to.
Yeah.
And if anything, it really let me be myself. And
Truly.
man, ugh, I just look back on the last like 3 years and 3.5 years, and just am so thankful that that was able to happen, because holy shit,
Yeah.
you
And,
can really struggle.
usually it takes people like, I can just think of the many stories. I'm fairly certain that like every single man that we've had on this podcast has echoed something similar. It's like therapy has changed everything. I didn't realize how much I was struggling until this. I didn't, and it's like there's this point where unless something is physically in your face, and a lot of people are talking about like even stories like you were talking about like panic attacks, you
I
thought
had
you
to
were
have that
dying.
for sure.
There
Yeah.
was a whole, like we had another guest, Darius from Beyond Anxiety, who literally was in the hospital with severe anxiety attacks consistently and thought something was so medically wrong, and then later was diagnosed with anxiety
Mhm.
just to start getting help with something that he's had his entire life. Because it's just been like, oh, well, whatever, until it gets physically in your face. You're like, well, I can just ignore it. And, it's like,
It turns physical for sure.
it
My back, I
does.
was
It
having
has
back
to.
problems. I was like, everything's wrong with me physically.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody once told me, a friend of mine was like, listen, man, I was always told, if you're not feeling good physically, work on your brain. And if you're not feeling good mentally, work on your physicalness, whatever he said. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
he said physicalness, but like, work on your body, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so it's like, if you're up in your head and mentally not feeling well, start
Yep.
start working out, start doing some physical things to get into your body. And then if your
Yeah.
body feels like shit, start working on your mind.
Yeah, it's
um
that brain body connection. And
yep.
I'm so passionate. I mean, I've literally been talking about this all week. It's like I'm so freaking passionate about that because
Yeah.
like what happens is we miss one or the other. And
Yeah.
then it's like they're so mental health is physical health. We have research out there, y'all. Like it does not, stress is literally stored in your body. Trauma
Yeah.
is in your body. Your emotions, when you're stressed, your shoulders are raised or your jaw is clenched. That's just what you notice. Think of like what's happening with like your appetite and thinking clearly, and add on like all of these like mental health issues that have been like adding up and adding up. I don't know, have you seen Heroes, like old school, the
No.
NBC show? Oh my
Uh-uh.
gosh, I would say spoiler alert, but it's been like 15 years at this
You're
point. But
like, you
anyways,
need to watch you. If
you
you haven't
should
watched
have
it by
seen it
now,
by
it's
now.
your
I don't
fault.
care. So at the end of season one, so the whole premise of like this movie Heroes is that everyone, like there's this big boom right over, or it's not a movie, it's a TV show, sorry, but it's like there's this big something and there's just a bunch of people who just get these superpowers, right? Like it's similar to like a lot of superhero shows. But the thing that was really interesting is there was one person whose power was absorbing everyone else's powers, and then like if they even came into contact with it, they always had that power. So at the beginning of season one, there's someone who sees the future and they see this sonic boom and they're trying to stop it and they're trying to stop it. And like, what can we do? There's someone who's going to destroy the world. And what, it's like, we got to save the world. Turns out the boom is actually from the person who had the superpowers of absorbing everyone else's. They had so much going on that they completely short circuited until they were like, and they caused the end of the world.
Wow.
So, but I love that analogy because it's just like, what's going on? It's literally, we are just absorbing and absorbing and absorbing without looking at, without having control, without anything. And so eventually, whether it's a long, like lifetimes of, or it's just like a little tiny thing and it's just like building up over, like, you're in a stressful period. And so you're literally going to cry over spilled milk, right? Like the tiniest thing doesn't matter if you've been pushing things down forever. The whole mindset shift thing bothers me so much because it's not always just that simple. If your nervous system, if your stress cup is still so filled, you can't just be like, it's fine, fixed it. Like, no, you have to actually look at the stuff in there. And yes, there are cognitive shifts and things that can support that. But if you are not looking at how you manage stress, if you are not looking at your nervous system, like one of the things that you were talking about earlier is that when people aren't showing emotion, that it doesn't mean there's not emotion. When you literally understand how the nervous system works and you get to the most primitive state of nervous system shut down, which is you're completely overloaded because you can't access what you need or want to do. There's like you're in fight or flight mode, which you're going to be emotional, right? You're going to be able to like quickly show up, be present. It's going to be more intense, but it's going to be reactive. But then if you can't access that, you're in a step down and you're in like a freeze or an overload state that you're either the like chronic people pleaser who's always saying yes and just making myself the chameleon and I'm not the problem. If I can't escape what's happening, if I can't actually address it, then I'm going to be there. Or you're just going to be in freeze and you're going to be numbed out and you're going to be like paralyzed and not be able to do anything. That is instinctual in how your nervous system operates. So if you find yourself just going from something is really stressful to numbing out, that's even more of an indicator that there's a challenge. And I wish more people understood that because it's like literally, and that's what your body is telling you, but you're like, oh, no, whatever. I'm not going to look at it. And we're taught to disconnect from our body as a society, right? Like again, and I'm sure men even more so.
Because we don't want to make it's like, don't make your emotions my problem.
No.
Like that's what we're taught, right? Like parents don't want, they're like, one of my favorites is seeing parents that allow their kids when they're having meltdowns to experience it and to help teach them regulating techniques, because the objective is not to not get upset, right? To not be emotional. The objective is to get better at regulating it quicker. And being good at like, okay, I'm feeling dysregulated. Like things are tough right now. I have these tools in my toolbox, right? And this is how I bring it to a manageable level. And at first, as a kid, if you learn these strategies, you're not going to be great at it. But I mean, honestly, most kids I see are better than the adults that I know at this, because adults were never taught it. So like
they've been taught this since they were young now.
Right. And so like they're starting it, and like you can learn pretty quickly how to regulate emotions. And sure, for an ADHD or someone that's neurodivergent, it's going to be more difficult because the emotions are more intense and we're not great at reading the signs beforehand. All those things are true. But it doesn't mean that you can't get it to a more manageable area. My thing is like, improvement is not completely erasing the issue. Improvement is making it less difficult and less frequent, right? Like my goal is to not always make sure I do things perfectly, but like my goal is, okay, last month I was someone that really struggled to, regulate my emotions when I got upset, and it happened like 2 or 3 times a month, or 2 or 3 times a week. Or when I got upset, it took me an hour to calm down from it. Well, this month my goal is I'm going to calm down from it within 30 to 40 minutes. And maybe instead of 2 to 3 times, it's going to be 1 to 2 times a week. And understanding that like you're never going to stop, right? Even as a parent, the goal is not to be the perfect parent. You're going to fuck up. There's going to be times you lose your cool. You don't do the right thing. You invalidate your kids. We're human. It's going to happen, right? It's understanding that there's a process here. You want to make it less frequent, less intense, and you want to work on the repair of it afterwards. You want to be okay with like, if I'm someone that is struggling with regulating my emotions with my wife, right? And I get angry and maybe I yell. What I want to work on is it not being as intense, not happening as often, and being a shorter lived period, but then also I want to get better at afterwards going and discussing it and being like, hey, I'm really sorry that happened. I'm going to continue to work on it, and then show how you're working on it, right?
Yep. Yep.
I would never say, and I think we do this so often, I'll never do that again, because I know I struggle with certain things, right?
Yeah.
So like if I forget to do something, I'm never gonna say I'll never do that again, because lo and behold, I know I forget shit.
Yep.
But I'm gonna be like, hey, I know that was important to you. This is what I'm gonna do to hopefully help the fact that I forget things.
Yeah.
And I'll forget them less frequently. And so if you're someone that struggles with emotional regulation and has anger issues, it's like, hey, I'm taking these steps to get better at it. I can't promise that it won't happen again, but I'm gonna really try to be aware of it. And like, this is what's happening with me,
Yeah.
right? I see red, like things get so, and like explain and talk about it, because being vulnerable is not something we were ever taught to do either as men. And it's
Mm-mm.
like, when I started getting vulnerable with that shit, oh my God, like I tell guys all the time, like, guys, that's how like things get better. Like, don't you like want to be understood? Like, I always hate
Mm-hmm.
being misunderstood. So like if I'm someone that really struggles with doing chores and housework, I sat down and explained why. Be like, this is what I'm really struggling with. It's not that I don't want, like, I want to do my part, right? Like, I want to help. I'm not just someone that's like, haha, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
And so sure, it wasn't like the next week I was like perfect at it. I'm still far from it, but man, have I made strides. And that's the
Yeah.
goal, right? Like, if I'm sure there's women out there that are like, holy shit, if my partner or man, my partner out there made strides in the thing that they struggle with, or even baby steps,
Yep.
like that would be fucking awesome.
Yep.
Like, that's the goal, right? And
Yep.
baby steps aren't hard. You don't, it's not like you go to a gym for the first time in forever and the trainer just tells you, all right, start benching 250. Like, no, they find out what your physical ability is right now.
Yeah.
Meet yourself where you're at. Meet your
Yeah.
kids where you're at. Meet people where they're at. Okay,
Yep.
this is what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
Cool. We're going to slowly increment you to where you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And we never stop to do that shit. We're always looking for like, oh, well, I've got to stop altogether. How
Yeah.
are you going to
Yeah.
stop getting angry or having anger issues or forgetting things just because you decide to? That's not
Mm-hmm.
how it works. You've been doing it your whole life.
No. And
Um,
there's
yeah.
two things with that. The first one is that as a woman, I would say that like if the most desirable traits that I look for in a man, like I'm straight cis, is to be vulnerable, as like even the tiniest bit of vulnerability and just like honesty, even within themselves, and accountability, and recognizing that, hey, I'm imperfect, this happened. That's that's all I'm asking for. Like just the tiniest little thing. Cause like it's when you want to avoid and you're programmed for this defense and whatever, it makes it that much harder to come together as a team, right? You get, and I understand that that's that program, but like just the tiniest vulnerability, like the thing that's just so ironic to me is that like men run from that so much. And I would say that most women I know, that is the thing that we value the most in a man. If you can be that
I want
vulnerable being.
I want to add to this for the fact that like this there's two sides to this. One, speaking to people that are attracted to men, you don't have to put up with the shit.
No,
Okay? So
no.
like, you don't have to.
Nope.
So that's half of it.
What do you
Now
think?
the
I'm
other half.
very single right now.
Right. Well, I
Very
would say,
single.
now talking to the men that are struggling with it, right?
Yeah.
I feel you though. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
get it. It is not easy. It's not just here to bash and be like, you need to
No,
change. Fuck you. What I'm
no.
saying is like, okay, if me's telling you, or Taylor saying like, hey, be vulnerable, or anybody telling you, we want you to be vulnerable and hold yourself accountable, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, in theory that's good, but it's hard for me to do.
Mm-hmm.
Going back, the people that are attracted to them, great, you don't have to worry about it. It's not your job to fix them. But
Yep.
going to you, the man that's struggling with it, like, cool, then your step one is not to just say, cool, I'm just going to be vulnerable and hold myself accountable. Your step one might be figuring out why, like figuring out why it's hard for you. And that is
Yeah.
totally okay, because I know plenty of dudes that have gotten past that too.
Yeah.
And maybe it is because it was ingrained in you that that is a weakness, or that is
Yeah.
not masculine, or that's not what men do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, right? Like there could be a million different reasons. And it's it can be uncomfortable, and it can feel like the wrong thing to do, and you may stray away from it. And so things I tell people is like, it's okay to do uncomfortable things. It's okay to do
It
things
is.
scared. It's okay to try new shit. And it's
And
okay
not
to ask
fix
for
it
help.
right away.
It's okay to ask for help. So,
Yeah.
you may not be ready for that relationship, but it might be time to work on you. If
Yeah.
anybody's seen the Barbie movie, like, you are enough. Like, and go work on yourself. And
Truly.
it it
Truly.
doesn't mean like it's gonna take you forever, right? Like, I know how that's
Mm-mm.
like, well, I want to, dude, go look up a therapist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, go find someone to talk to.
Yeah.
Um and start somewhere. That's all. Like, just start
Truly.
somewhere.
Truly. And recognizing too that like men are programmed to be fixers. Give me a
For
job,
sure.
I do it, it's done. Action,
Oh, dude.
result, action, result, right? And so, and it is harder because it's like emotions are nuanced. It's not just going to be a fix it.
Not
It's not
simple.
just going to be,
Yep.
I would get in so many arguments and relationships that my long-term partner for that I've known like my entire life. And then we jumped into a romantic relationship and it was just very different dynamic and really hard. And they're just like, tell me what to do to fix it. And I'm like, there is no fixing it. It's not, you
Just
can't just
being, yeah.
fix. I can't give
I
you
still
a
have trouble with
guidebook.
that too. But yes,
Like, I
totally.
can't. I'm like, I love you. I'm here to support you. These are the tiny little things. And like, and also recognizing, especially when you realize in like romantic relationships and you're like, wow, it's very easy to externalize or project. And I'm talking to anyone, regardless of gender, that when something in you internally comes up that's a big emotion or like a trigger or something you haven't experienced in other areas of your life, recognizing that we want to say it's because of our partner. But really, there may be some truth to that. Maybe, right? They may be
We
triggering
don't know
something
the
in us.
relationship, right? There might be
We don't
relationships
know.
where it's just like you're actually dating a narcissist, and you're
Truly,
totally right. So no idea. But
truly.
yeah.
And also recognizing that our deepest wounds come out in our most intimate, safe relationships.
For sure.
And when we talk about romantic relationships, we're often replaying our childhood wounds that we didn't realize. And that's why, especially when I'm talking to like trauma survivors, like complex trauma, where you didn't get your emotional needs met and you're like, oh, that's not trauma, whatever. And then you start acting and you recognize like there's like attachment theory and oh my gosh, like the one, there's like avoidant and anxious and there's so much to that. It's a whole other conversation.
For sure.
But like recognizing that your reaction or your response may not be just because of them or their behavior. And I'm not discounting anything that is unsafe, that you're like, I can't tolerate this. It's
Right.
very different. I'm talking about two human beings who genuinely want to be together, want to be on the same team, want to, and both are working actively and are struggling. It's just honestly, maybe look to your childhood. Like, and that's hard. That's real hard. I know it's hard,
Thanks,
but like,
mom.
sorry. And it's not even, that's the thing is like, when immediately that defense comes up, people are like, well, my parents were good. My parents were whatever. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
valid. You could have great parents. Maybe you
Totally.
weren't raised like a narcissist, like I was. Okay. Like
Totally.
maybe that was not
Yeah.
the case. Even so, your child brain processes things differently. You
Yeah.
didn't have all these higher level reasoning to understand and process emotions. You didn't have your own self regulation skills. And maybe you still struggle with that. But like we had to learn all of these things from adults. And the generation that a lot of us who are listening right now who were raised from was just like the adults that were saying, suck it up, get over it. And it's not being mean, that's just the generation. So when we're
Yep.
talking to older millennials, Gen Z, stepping into that and recognizing like I struggle with emotions in this way, or I am a perfectionist, or I put, like I immediately get defensive, or I shut down if I'm not perfect, or my partner is doing this, or whatever it may be. It's recognizing that like the way that the generations were set up for us, unless our parents were incredibly emotionally intelligent, which some had wonderful parents, we had to rely on co-regulation and emotional needs, your social emotional needs, and you having a hard time and having big emotions, and someone sitting with you and showing you how to support and calm down and saying it's okay to feel this way, it's okay to do whatever. And that is a core need that a lot of us didn't meet. And so now it is showing up in our adult relationships, and especially comes up in these intimate relationships. So just recognize that, like, yes, there are people who, even I would say, even people who are narcissists, okay, there may be a reason that they have developed that response and it has gone into
For
a
sure.
personality disorder. We can recognize that and have awareness for that, and even have compassion for that. And like, honestly, looking at my parents, I can be like, I see why you are the way you are. And still, I don't have to tolerate that. I
Yeah.
don't have to stick around and fix it, and recognize that I can have compassion and still take care of myself. But you, on the other hand, have to be willing to look in the mirror. And a lot of times, our romantic relationships is a beautiful mirror. That person who is so safe and everything that we feel like we want in this life and we desire and we feel so close to, that's a mirror. And if you're not ready to see what's in the other side of that mirror looking back at you, it can be really hard to be in a relationship in that way. And so recognizing that you have choices to either project and get defensive, shut down, or be honest and take the tiny steps that you can to say, okay, this is my side, this is your side, we're on the same team, we have some stuff to work together. And people thinking like that healthy relationships are just gonna be happy all the time. It's not. It's the
No.
people who can fight and work through the things and come together in conflict and hard things and communicate through and work on their own stuff and come together in the same team and work hard at what that is and building that foundation. So I say this as someone who is single right now. However, I still know what to do, y'all.
Dude, I talk to
Standards
parents
are
and
high.
I talk to parents and I don't have kids, but like
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, so it's like
Yeah.
it is, you know, something that, and we always, I think as people that make content, or you know, we we make a lot of generalizations, and there's so many times that I like say something and I go, obviously this isn't for everyone and it might not be your situation, right?
100%.
But it's pretty easy, I think, sometimes to generalize that last bit that we just talked about with our, especially our generation.
Mm-hmm.
um it's just kind of the way that it seems to be for almost everyone. um Almost, it's so like, I talk to so many dudes that like are doing so well with this, and still, like, I say this now, like, I am not as in touch with my emotions as I want to be.
Yeah.
I have moments where I'm like hiding a lot of shit. I have moments where I'm pretending to be something I'm not in public because I'm just so used to, like, oh, this is how I'm supposed to act as a dude, or like this is how I'm supposed to think, or this is that, and whatever.
Yeah.
And you know, even making that joke before, like, the things like just enter my brain because they've been programmed since I was little.
Of
It's
course.
like, this is how it is. There's so many gender norms and stereotypes, and
Yeah, it's your
it's
subconscious.
it's fucked.
Yeah, I mean,
So
all of ours, really, a lot of people,
yeah,
it's just, and
no,
it
totally.
runs like 90% of your decisions if you're not conscious to it.
Yeah, and
Truly,
it's you have to work on it, right? Like,
you
there's so
have
many
to.
times, like, that it's really about checking in.
Hmm.
Okay, like, the idea is like, all right, I'm gonna check in when I'm not involved. And this, I mean, this goes kind of for everything. I say this with people with ADHD, that are struggling with rumination. Like, the way you quote unquote fix the thing or work on the thing is to work on it outside of it,
Hmm.
outside of the actual issue.
Yeah.
When we were just talking, like, when you're ruminating and you're having this negative self-talk and that boulder's like gaining steam and rolling downhill, you cannot fix and heal right there. You have to get out of that first,
Yep.
because the work is done in therapy. It's done when people, you know, I'm not a journaler, but I think if you can journal, it's fucking awesome. If you're able to like talk about your wins in the morning, or talk
Hmm.
about your wins at night, or, you know, meditate. These are things that I actually struggle to do. So I don't do that. But what I've ended up doing is I have created community. Like I have check-ins with so many of my like community members. We do body double. We have just like weekly chats where we just kind of
Yep.
talk about shit. And that is my way of checking in, because for me it's community. I need other people to like hold myself accountable.
Yeah.
So I go on podcasts and talk about stuff like this. Kind of stuff is therapeutic for me. This is for me
Truly.
like processing out loud, right? We're talking about being
Yep.
verbal processors. So
Yep.
for me, this is how I do that.
Yep.
This is how I process the shit that I'm going through.
Mm-hmm.
For other people, they have to write it down. For other people, they have to talk to a therapist. Whatever it is, you have to have regular maintenance on your vehicle. It's just what happens, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like, oh, I won therapy and fixed everything, so I'm done now.
Check. No.
Though that was something I felt like I was trying to do when I first went to therapy. I was like,
Me too.
I'm gonna fucking be the best therapy client ever. What do you need me to do? I'm gonna fix mental health in 3 weeks. Watch. Like, what's the record? What's the record for like,
Oh my gosh.
healing? But
Yep.
that's what it is. It's an ongoing process. It's just like,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to work on your physical health, you have to go to the gym regularly, because if you stop, you lose it, right? And it's the
Yep.
same with your mental health. You have to work on your mental health regularly, whatever that looks like for you. And some people that aren't working on it right now are probably thinking, wow, that really sucks. I don't want to do this forever. I'm not even doing it
Yeah.
now. Why would I want to do it forever?
Yeah.
And it goes back to the thing, like, start small, right?
Yep.
Talk to somebody about it, join something, start following some people on Instagram, whatever
Mm-hmm.
it is you need to do, just start.
And I think it's gonna be hard, and I love that idea. It's like choose your hard. Or is
For
it going
sure.
to
I
be
can do hard
hard that you're
things.
repeating these cycles, or is it going to, like, and all of these things that come with it, and just the heartbreak that comes with that, or not feeling accepted, not feeling understood, finding yourself in just like these moments where you're like, why are things not working out? Or is it going to be the hard work of starting to look at yourself a little bit, starting to shift some things, going to therapy? Like,
That shit's
what's the
scary.
hard gonna be?
It's scary.
Life
It's
is
hard.
hard.
It's uncomfortable. And like, as someone that is, and I wouldn't even say I'm on the other side of it, right? But I'm on the other side of starting it.
Yeah.
Like, if you would have asked me 4 years ago, I'd be like, yeah, I don't need therapy. That's dumb. But like, talk to 4 years ago, Ron, and not even on my radar. Whatever, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me.
Yep.
And I come to you today with just, I can't even explain how thankful and happy I am that I
Mm-hmm.
started that journey. Like,
Truly.
I feel so much better. You guys, like, you're hurting. Shit sucks. You're angry.
Yeah.
You like, no, screw that. That's no fun.
Yeah.
I still feel those emotions, but man,
Yeah.
they are not all the time anymore.
No. And they're not as debilitating.
For sure. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, going back to step one, if you have ADHD, there's times I've had consultations with people and I've said like, yeah, I could totally help you, but probably after you work on some shit first, because
Yep.
you can't, like, coaching is figuring out what the invisible thing is in front of you. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it is relationships with your parents. Sometimes it is negative self-talk and trauma that you've had. And if you're able to see it and be like, oh, okay, I can overcome that, then great, we can continue coaching.
Mm-hmm.
But if healing needs to take place, which a lot of times it does, especially for a lot of us guys,
Yep.
go take care of that wound.
Yep. Very much so. And it's like, if we don't work on healing ourselves, we're just going to bleed on the people we care about most.
Yeah.
And that sucks.
And I hate doing laundry. So who wants to do that?
Right?
Get blood all
Truly,
over my shirts.
like all the time. And then the executive functioning that goes into that. And then, oh man.
Like, I'll start the laundry, but like, just like you were saying, like piles of clothes everywhere.
It's the folding and
stupid.
the putting away.
Also, one of the coolest things
Oh.
I learned about my ADHD as to why I always struggled to put things away is because, and when someone told me once, they were like, well, everything has a place.
Truly.
And I'm in my head, I'm like, but I have to remember where all those places are.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would say, no, you don't. You just know. And I'm like, I don't know. I have to look for it.
Yeah.
And so when things are out of my vision, I'm like, it could be in one of, maybe it's there. Like I have to use brain energy and take up, it's kind of the same thing as routines, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if I have
Object
shit
permanence.
everywhere in front of me, I'm like, oh yeah, I can just go grab that stuff. So
Mhm.
putting it away might look better to everybody else, but like it makes my life harder. And I
Yeah.
have to put effort towards it. This is stupid, right? So
Yeah. And then it's
um
also like after a certain time, your brain stops seeing it in the same place. You have to move it
yeah.
into a different place so your
Right, it
brain
becomes
starts to register it
background
again.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
I'm always looking for,
Yeah.
if anybody out there has any suggestions, like go ahead and like Instagram message me or whatever. Like I, by the way, I love Instagram messages too, but ways to like hang clothes and like, or like having just stuff that you can like fold clothes over. This is so hard to explain, right? But like, how do I hang clothes on the wall that isn't
Mm.
like wallpaper, but it like makes, I don't know. I want things to look nice and be organized, but also it makes sense for my brain. And
Mm-hmm.
I think someone needs to invent that shit. Like,
Yeah.
how can we make clothes invisible and then I press a button and they're just spread out in front of me? Where's
Go to
the
the
science
Jetsons.
there?
Go to the
Right?
Jetsons.
Like
That's what they
that's what I
want.
want. I
Like you
need
want
like
that. I want the thing that's just gonna like automatically change my hairstyle because that's just a whole thing. And like that just
sure.
determines, yeah. I'm like that. You want that. That's lovely. I'm literally thinking of like those shoe organizers and then just like put different things in there.
But
Or a
then I still have to
curtain.
fold it and then
I
I have
mean,
to search
yeah,
through it.
I
It's better.
know, I
It's
know.
better.
It's
It's better.
better, but yeah, no, I know.
I want
I
like
hear you.
a
I
like
hear you.
I want a thing that like sticks out from the wall that can like fold,
Mm-hmm.
like so like I
Mm-hmm.
imagine like a stick from the wall that I hang all the clothes on and then it just folds against the wall
And then it
and
goes
then I
like
can
up.
like pull it out. Yeah,
What
and
if
up. Like
what
there's
if
like
you
a
had
contraption like in the ceiling.
you might have to invent this. Like, what if like those old school beds? I mean, people probably still have them, but like
Oh,
they
the
fold
like the
against the
Murphy
wall.
beds. Yeah,
What?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What if you literally just like make one of those into like a folding
Oh
closet,
my
and then like you
god.
just I don't know. I
I'm
don't
gonna do it.
know. I'm just
All right.
saying. Is the OT brain going right
A
now? I'm like,
Murphy closet.
right? And then it's just
Yeah, and then it's like when you pull it out too, it's, I mean, if you think about like a Murphy bed, there's tons of, there's like a
yeah,
room for a bed. There's
yeah,
gonna be totally room for my
yeah.
clothes. Okay.
See, and
I'm
then
gonna Google this shit now. Look at us
see,
coming up with
you're
stuff.
you're and you'd be like, oh, that one time, just send me a little bit of money when you make a lot of money, okay? Just a
I'm not
teeny
gonna,
bit.
here's
Give
the
me a
problem.
teeny bit of credit. I'm
Here's
kidding.
the
I'm
problem.
kidding.
Like we can come up with this. I need somebody to make it for me.
Ain't that the truth?
Anyone, if we have any engineers out there that
Oh,
are fantastic at starting projects and want to work with
really.
us, Taylor and I have a fantastic idea to make millions.
And
So
back on the
let's
executive
do
functioning
that.
train. Ah, oh my gosh. Well, Ron, I think we need to make that come to life. And also, thank you so much for coming and having this conversation. I
Oh, it was a
think that it
pleasure.
is very needed. And, we both were like, we're just going to let this go how it goes. And it's
It
just
was
going to
fun.
work
Yeah.
out.
Yeah,
That's how you vibe, the
for
ADHD
sure.
vibe. It works the best. So thank you so much. And can you share a little bit more about what you do, what you're working on right now, and how people can connect with you?
Sure. I mean, in ADHD fashion, I'm doing so many freaking things. Something
What?
that I've done for myself, and my business is I've decided to kind of do just a bunch of ADHD things under the umbrella of ADHD. So I coach, I'm an advocate, I run a community, I do groups for people. I'm also, if you're an ADHD professional out there or someone that works in the ADHD space, whether that's as a therapist, psychiatrist, doctor, researcher, coach, content creator, maybe you're just somebody that loves making ADHD memes and you want to collaborate with other ADHD professionals. Me and a fellow coach do a cruise that we are having our second cruise
Love that.
in September. We are full for that one, but we're planning on doing another one next year, and we're trying to make it like a biannual thing,
Love that.
where we are bringing just kind of different sections of the ADHD community, because it does feel like we, have our cohorts that are content creators, our coaches, our therapists, and we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to bring everyone together to bring different perspective and to bring better content to the community, more accessible content. So I'm doing that, and yeah, just anything I can. My main kind of thing is advocacy always, but as a coach, I do one-on-ones group and have that community. You can find me at adhdcoachron.com, ADHD_Ron on Instagram, and ADHD Coach Ron on TikTok. I'm also on Threads, and I freaking love it there. If anybody is on Threads, I know some people have gotten bored with it, but like I spend my day whenever something witty or stupid comes to my head, I post it on Threads. So I
I love
encourage you to
that.
go on the Threads and check it out. I
That
talk
was
about
what I
pickles a
tried.
lot.
Yeah.
I talk about pickles a lot, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. But
Awesome.
yeah, feel free to like message me. I love talking ADHD
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah.
and yeah, that's about it. Did I hit
We're
everything? I think that's what you asked me.
You told me about an announcement that you're working on that will be new when we were talking
Oh
yesterday.
yeah,
I
that's
just want to make sure
exciting.
you want to announce it before
I
I'm like,
do. Well, it's because
hey,
I haven't done it yet, so I forgot.
I
But
know.
like, we're we're starting a podcast, me and a fellow coach. She's freaking hilarious. Her name is Liz. Liz Welshman. God, I should find out what her Instagram is too. But we are starting a podcast called I Forgot to Tell You Something.
Love that.
And the objective of our podcast is to kind of talk about things from an ADHD perspective. So it's not necessarily an ADHD podcast. We're going to tackle things like imposter syndrome and RSD and emotional regulation and stuff, but then also some things that you don't hear either men or women talking about. So we're going to be talking about like either hypo arousal when it comes to like sex and ADHD, or hyper arousal when it comes to sex and ADHD. We're going to be talking about breast cancer. We're going to be talking about IVF, just something my wife and I are going through. And as a man, it's something that I think a lot of men should understand a lot more because we don't. And
Mm-hmm.
what I've seen already with doctors that and how they treat men in the process is kind of just like, oh, they don't need to know anything and they don't care.
Mm.
And so we're going to be talking about that, and all of this with an ADHD lens, because us as ADHDers have unique perspectives on things and are super emotional, and so what it's like to go through these processes. And yeah, we're really excited. Also, we think we're really funny, so
You are
I'm gonna
funny.
try to do that.
There's that external validation. Ron is very funny. I do
Thanks.
not know your co-host, but I will say you are very funny.
She's
And
just
I'm
a
excited.
hysterical. She's one of those like delightfully unhinged
Mm-hmm.
Australians
Love
that
that.
just like naturally, like, it's not like she's sitting there cracking jokes, but it's just like she just has that, like, you're laughing at her all the time because she's just witty and hysterical,
Just
and
naturally has that on, when you're
she's
looking
got
at the
that like thing
personality
where
traits.
she fucks up something and it just makes it funnier. I think the Australian accent happens too, where she's like, "Oh fuck," like it's great.
Love
She was
that.
at the ADHD conference last year and
Yeah.
had some slides like screw up and had the entire audience just like crying laughing because
Love that.
she's just like, yeah, delightfully awkward and funny. So
Yep.
we're gonna have a blast. We even said that it's partially it's for us because we just get
Yeah.
into really great combos and laugh and talk about stupid shit. So
Yeah.
you can check us out. We're going to start recording in a couple weeks. So I guess by the time this comes out, hopefully we'll have an episode out, but if not, yeah, shoot me a message on Instagram. Give me some external validation. No,
You were
tell me how great
so
I
good
am.
on Taylor's
Oh
podcast.
my
Oh my
gosh,
gosh.
guys,
Yeah.
stop, but go on. Yeah,
I
it
need
was
this
really
to
great.
function.
I had a blast. Thank you.
Good, of course. I will make sure everyone go check out all of the things that Ron has going on. Again, thank you so much. And I hope everyone has whatever day feels right to you. Have a good one.